You don't notice the first mutation. That's how it gets you. Your body changes while you sleep, while you eat, while you laugh with the men who will soon fear you. By the time you realize something is wrong, it's already too late to stop what you're becoming. I was Sergeant Marcus Vrel of the 83rd Cadian Regiment when it happened. 15 years I had served the God Emperor. 15 years of mud and blood and watching good men die for stretches of ground no wider than a cargo container. I had earned my rank through survival, not heroism. On battlefields across 3 sectors, I had learned the most important lesson the Imperial Guard teaches. Stay alive one more day. But some lessons can't prepare you for what chaos does to flesh. The planet was called Vorgas III. We had been fighting there for 8 months, pushing back cultist forces that had overrun the southern continent. The war was nearly won. Command said another week and we could board the transports and leave this rock behind. Just one more week, that's what they always say. The battle that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Our platoon was clearing out the ruins of what used to be a textile factory. The cultists had made it a stronghold, filling the collapsed rooms with traps and ambush points. We moved slowly, checking every corner, every shadow. The air smelled like burned plastic and something sweet that made your stomach turn. Private Hendricks was on point. He was young, maybe 19 standard years, with blonde hair that stuck out from under his helmet at odd angles. He had joined our regiment 6 months back and still hadn't learned to stop smiling. I was 10 meters behind him when he stepped on the wire. The explosion wasn't large, just enough to blow out a wall section and fill the corridor with dust and debris. When the smoke cleared, Hendricks was down, screaming, his leg twisted at an angle that legs don't bend. I ran to him without thinking. That's what sergeants do. You don't leave your men behind, not even the ones who smile too much. 2 more soldiers covered us while I dragged Hendricks back toward our defensive position. That's when the cultist appeared. He came from a side room we had marked as clear. His face was covered with crude tattoos, symbols I didn't recognize, but that made my eyes hurt to look at. He wore rags instead of armor and carried a knife that looked like it had been made from sharpened scrap metal. The blade was maybe 20 centimeters long with an edge that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. He screamed something in a language that sounded like choking and lunged at me. I dropped Hendricks and brought up my laser gun, but I was too slow. The cultist was fast, faster than any normal human should move. His knife caught me across the left forearm, cutting through my uniform sleeve and into the skin beneath. The pain was sharp and immediate, like touching a hot stove. I pulled the trigger and my laser gun bolt took him in the chest. He went down hard, smoke rising from the wound. The whole fight lasted maybe 3 seconds. My arm burned where the knife had cut me. The wound wasn't deep, just a slash about 8 centimeters long that bled more than it probably should. Corporal Chen helped me get Hendricks back to our medic while I held pressure on my arm with a field dressing. The medic looked at Hendricks first because his injuries were worse. When she finally got to me, she cleaned the wound with antiseptic that stung worse than the original cut and wrapped it in clean bandages. Standard treatment. Nothing special. She asked if I felt dizzy or sick. I said no. She told me to report any unusual symptoms. I said I would. That was my first mistake. The wound hurt for the rest of that day, a dull throbbing that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. By evening, during our meal of protein paste and recycled water, the pain had faded to almost nothing. I unwrapped the bandage to check it before bed. The cut was already closing, the edges pink and healthy looking. Fast healing, but not impossible. Some people just recover quickly. I rewrapped it and went to sleep in my bunk, squeezed between 20 other soldiers in a room that smelled like sweat and gun oil. That night I dreamed for the first time. In the dream, I stood in a place with no sky. The ground beneath my feet was made of something soft and warm, like flesh, but not quite. All around me stretched darkness that seemed to breathe, and in that darkness something watched me. I couldn't see it clearly, but I felt its attention like pressure against my skin. It had eyes. Hundreds of eyes, thousands, all of them looking at me with an interest that made me feel small and important at the same time. A voice spoke, but not with sound. It spoke directly into my thoughts. "You are broken," it said. "Let me fix you." I woke up gasping, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was dark except for the emergency lighting that cast everything in red shadows. Around me, other soldiers snored and shifted in their sleep. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. But my left arm tingled where the cultist had cut me, and when I touched the bandage, the skin underneath felt warm. 2 days later, we were loading supplies when I noticed the change in my strength. We had received a resupply drop, crates of ammunition and rations that needed to be moved from the landing zone to our forward position. Each crate weighed maybe 60 kilograms and usually required 2 men to lift safely. I grabbed one end of a crate while Private Yoris took the other. But when I lifted, the crate came up easily. Too easily. Yoris stumbled because he wasn't prepared for how fast I moved. The crate felt light in my hands, like it weighed 20 kilograms instead of 60. I set it down quickly and made an excuse about adrenaline. Yoris laughed it off, but I knew something was wrong. Over the next week, I noticed more changes. My senses had become sharper. I could hear conversations from across the compound that should have been too far away to make out clearly. When soldiers walked past, I could smell their fear before combat, a sour scent like spoiled milk. At night, I barely needed sleep. 4 hours and I felt completely rested while others needed 8 or more. Food tasted different too, less flavorful, like eating wet paper. But I was stronger and faster than I had ever been in my life. During a firefight in the factory district, I moved between cover positions with speed that surprised even me. My reflexes had improved so much that I could track incoming fire and adjust my position before the shots arrived. The wound on my arm had healed completely in 5 days. Not even a scar remained, just smooth skin that looked slightly darker than the surrounding flesh. I told myself it was good healing. I told myself I was lucky. But at night, the dreams came again. That watching presence, those countless eyes, the voice offering improvement, offering strength, offering purpose. Each morning I woke feeling more rested and more wrong. 3 weeks after the cultist cut me, I broke my laser gun. It happened during a routine cleaning. I was reassembling the weapon, fitting the power cell back into its housing when I squeezed too hard. The plastic casing cracked in my hand like an eggshell. The sound was loud in the quiet of the barracks. Several soldiers looked over. I stared at the broken weapon, at my hand that had crushed military-grade polymer without effort. Corporal Chen walked over and picked up the pieces. "Must have been defective," he said. "Happens sometimes. I'll requisition you a new one." I nodded and thanked him, but my hand was shaking. Not from weakness, from the effort of not crushing everything I touched. That night I stood in the washroom and looked at myself in the cracked mirror bolted to the wall. My face looked the same, brown hair cut short, gray eyes, jaw with 3 days of stubble, the face of a soldier who had seen too many battles. But when I looked closer, I saw small differences. My eyes seemed brighter somehow. My skin looked healthier than it should after months of fighting. My shoulders had gotten broader, enough that my uniform felt tight across the back. And when I smiled to test my reflection, my teeth looked sharper than I remembered. Not fangs. Not yet. Just slightly more pointed than they had been. I knew what was happening. In the Cadian regiments, we're drilled on the signs of corruption from childhood. We know what to watch for in ourselves and others. Unusual strength, strange healing, changes in appearance. These are the marks of mutation, of the ruinous powers working their evil on human flesh. The correct response is to report immediately to your commanding officer. Corrupted soldiers are given the Emperor's mercy, a quick execution to prevent the spread of taint. I had seen it happen 3 times in my 15 years of service. Each time the corrupted soldier had gone, quietly, accepting their fate with dignity. Each time I had thought I would do the same if it ever happened to me. But standing in that washroom, looking at my slightly wrong reflection, I said nothing. I made no report. I went back to my bunk and lay awake, listening to the breathing of 20 other soldiers who would kill me if they knew what I was becoming. My left arm tingled where the cultist's blade had cut me 3 weeks before. Under my skin, I could feel something moving, something changing, something growing. And in my mind, barely audible, I heard the whisper of that voice from my dreams. "You are broken. Let me fix you." The choice had already been made, though I didn't realize it yet. By staying silent, by hiding the changes, I had chosen survival over duty. And that choice, that single moment of weakness, had started me down a path that would end with me becoming something that was no longer Sergeant Marcus Vrell. Something that was no longer human. But that realization would come later. For now, I simply pulled my blanket tighter and tried to ignore the warmth spreading through my body like fever, like infection, like the first touch of something vast and terrible that had noticed me and decided I was worth keeping. The changes came faster after that night. Within a week, I had to request a new uniform because my old one no longer fit across the shoulders and chest. The supply sergeant made a joke about me finally hitting the protein rations hard. I forced a laugh and took the larger size. When I put it on, it fit perfectly, but I knew it wouldn't for long. My body was reshaping itself in ways that had nothing to do with exercise or nutrition. The bone structure was the worst part. I could feel my skeleton shifting beneath my skin, especially at night when I lay in my bunk trying to sleep. My spine would ache with a deep pressure that felt like growing pains, except I was 32 years old and long past growing. My shoulders would throb as the bones widened and thickened. Sometimes I would press my hand against my chest and feel my ribs moving, expanding, creating more space for organs that were changing in ways I didn't want to think about. The pain was constant but manageable, like a toothache that never quite got bad enough to scream about. My skin changed texture in patches. The area around my left shoulder blade developed a hardness that felt like armor plating under the surface. When I pressed on it, the skin didn't give the way normal skin should. It felt more like pressing on plastic or maybe insect shell. The patch was about 10 centimeters across and growing slowly larger each day. I found similar patches forming on my right hip and along my ribs on both sides. I kept my shirt on at all times, even when sleeping, and made excuses to avoid the communal showers. My hands were changing too. The fingers on my left hand, the arm where the cultist had cut me, had grown slightly longer. Not enough that anyone would notice at a glance, but enough that I could tell when I made a fist or held my lasgun. And there was something else. Small bumps had appeared on the edge of my left palm, just below where my pinky finger connected to my hand. At first I thought they were blisters or maybe some kind of rash. But they were hard like bone, and when I touched them I could feel sensation as if they were part of me. They were finger buds. I was growing extra fingers. The realization made my stomach turn and my skin go cold with fear. The nightmares continued every night without fail. I would close my eyes and immediately find myself in that place with no sky, standing on ground that felt like warm flesh. The watching presence had gotten closer. Now I could see shapes in the darkness. Massive forms that shifted and changed, never quite solid enough to understand but always there. And the eyes. I had been wrong about there being thousands. There were millions, billions, endless eyes that looked at me with hunger and love and something else I had no words for. The voice spoke to me differently now. It didn't just offer improvement anymore. It showed me visions of what I could become. In these visions, I saw myself as something powerful and terrible. My body was body, huge, maybe 3 meters tall, with muscles like steel cables and skin that could turn away bullets. I had 4 arms instead of 2, each one strong enough to tear through tank armor. My face was no longer human, but something between a man and a beast, with a jaw that could bite through bone and eyes that could see in complete darkness. And I was free. Free from taking orders, free from watching friends die for meaningless ground, free from the grinding hopelessness of being just another expendable soldier in a war that would never end. The vision was horrible and beautiful at the same time, and part of me wanted it more than I had ever wanted anything. But I was still human enough to be terrified. During the day, I went through the motions of being Sergeant Vrel. I led my squad on patrols. I filed reports. I inspected weapons and checked defensive positions. But every moment I was aware of my changing body, of the strength in my hands that could crush steel, of the hardening patches of skin that spread a little further each night. I was a monster pretending to be a man, and the pretending was getting harder. My eyes changed color in the second month. They had always been gray, a flat color that matched the smoke and ash of too many battlefields, but now they were lighter, almost silver, with flecks of gold that seemed to catch light in strange ways. When I looked in mirrors, which I tried not to do, my pupils had stretched slightly vertical like a cat's eyes or maybe a snake's. The change was subtle enough that I thought I might be able to hide it. I started wearing my helmet more often, even indoors. When people asked, I said I had developed sensitivity to the lights. Nobody questioned it. Soldiers develop all kinds of problems after long deployments. The real trouble started when my reflexes improved beyond human normal. We were on patrol in the ruined commercial district when it happened. Private Hendricks, his leg healed but leaving him with a slight limp, was walking point again. He knocked over a piece of debris that had been balancing on a pile of rubble. A metal beam, maybe 2 meters long and weighing at least 20 kilograms, fell straight toward him. There was no time to shout a warning. The beam was going to hit him in the head and probably kill him. I moved without thinking. My hand shot out and caught the beam in midair, just centimeters from Hendricks' face. I stopped it completely, holding the full weight with one hand while my arm didn't even shake. The entire squad froze and stared at me. Hendricks recovered first. He stammered out a thank you, his face pale with shock. The others muttered agreement, but their eyes were wrong. They looked at me the way you look at something dangerous, something that might bite. I set the beam down carefully and made a joke about lucky reflexes. Nobody laughed. We finished the patrol in near silence. That night I heard whispers in the barracks. The words mutation and corruption floated through conversations that stopped whenever I got close. I knew my time was running out. Corporal Chen pulled me aside 3 days later. We had been friends once, years ago, before the weight of too many battles had turned friendship into simple professional respect. He led me to a quiet corner of the compound where we wouldn't be overheard. His face was serious, the kind of serious that comes before bad news. "You need to be careful, Marcus," he said, using my first name for the first time in months. "People are talking. They're saying you've changed, that you're not natural anymore." I asked him what he thought. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes studying my face. Finally, he spoke. "I think you saved my life in that factory. I think you've saved a lot of lives. But I also think something happened to you, and whatever it is, it's getting worse. You should report to the commissar, let them examine you, maybe they can help." We both knew they couldn't help. We both knew what happened to corrupted soldiers, but Chen was giving me a chance, telling me that others had noticed, and that official attention was coming whether I wanted it or not. The 83rd was undermanned after 8 months of grinding combat. Command pushed us hard to hold territory with half our original strength. We had lost 2 full companies in the first month alone, and replacements came slowly if they came at all. Nobody wanted to lose another experienced sergeant, even one who seemed off. The officers looked the other way when convenient, prioritizing combat effectiveness over strict adherence to purity protocols. It was a pragmatic choice born of desperation, but it bought me time I shouldn't have had. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I lay in my bunk and felt my body continuing its transformation. My teeth had gotten sharper over the past weeks, not dramatically, but enough that my tongue kept finding new edges when I ran it across them. My jaw ached constantly with a pressure that suggested the bone was reshaping itself. And I could go days now without food. My body was running on something other than normal nutrition, something that came from those dreams, from that watching presence that whispered promises of power and freedom. The voices in my head had gotten worse too. At first, there had been just one voice, the one that offered improvement. But now there were more. 4 distinct voices that spoke over each other, sometimes arguing, sometimes agreeing, but always present. One voice promised strength and glory, showing me visions of crushing my enemies with bare hands while they screamed. Another voice offered knowledge and change, whispering secrets about how flesh could be reshaped, how mutation was just another form of growth. A third voice spoke of pleasure and excess, of sensations beyond what human nerves could process. And the fourth voice was quiet and patient, promising that all things decay eventually, that rot was just another form of peace. The voices terrified me because they made sense. Each one offered something I wanted, something I needed, and I was starting to have trouble remembering why I should refuse. The dreams showed me more each night. I saw other soldiers like me, men and women who had been touched by chaos and transformed into something beyond human. Some of them were monsters, mindless beasts that existed only to kill and destroy. But others retained their intelligence, their sense of self. They had become something new, something powerful, something that served dark gods but did so with purpose and understanding. The dreams asked me which I wanted to be. Did I want to fight the changes and lose my mind as my body became monstrous? Or did I want to accept what was happening and guide the transformation into something useful? The choice seemed obvious when I was dreaming. But when I woke up, covered in sweat and breathing hard, I remembered my oath to the Emperor and felt shame burn in my chest. I started avoiding people. I volunteered for solo guard duty and long-range patrols where I wouldn't have to interact with other soldiers for hours at a time. When I did have to be around others, I kept my helmet on and my responses short. The isolation helped hide the changes but made the voices in my head louder. Without the distraction of conversation and human company, I had nothing to do but listen to the whispers that promised power and purpose. My strength continued to increase. By the 3rd month after the cultist cut me, I could lift weights that should have required 3 grown men. I discovered this by accident when a supply truck broke down and needed to be pushed. I put my shoulder against the rear bumper and shoved. The truck moved easily, its wheels rolling despite the parking brake being engaged. The driver stared at me through his side mirror with eyes so wide I could see the whites from 5 meters away. After that, I stopped helping with heavy work. Better to seem lazy than to reveal how strong I had become. The physical changes were becoming harder to hide. Bone spurs had started growing from my shoulder blades, small, sharp points that pressed against my uniform and sometimes tore the fabric. I wrapped bandages around my torso to flatten them, but I could feel them getting longer each week. My spine had developed a curve that wasn't quite a hunchback, but definitely wasn't normal. I had to adjust how I stood and walked to keep people from noticing. And my left hand now had 6 fingers instead of 5. The extra digit had grown in over the course of 2 weeks, starting as a bud and developing into a fully functional finger complete with nail and knuckle. I kept that hand in my pocket or under my glove at all times. The commissar finally called for me on a Thursday afternoon. I had been expecting it, dreading it, knowing it was coming. Commissar Holt was a tall woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death to be shocked by anything. She ran our regiment with strict discipline, but also with a fairness that made soldiers respect, rather than fear her. When I entered her office, she was standing by the window looking out at the compound where soldiers moved between buildings on their daily duties. Behind her desk, I noticed a Vox unit already connected to the regimental priest's chambers. This wasn't just a conversation. She didn't turn around when she spoke. Sergeant Vrel, I've received concerning reports about your behavior and physical condition. Multiple witnesses have observed unusual strength, changes in appearance, and antisocial tendencies. These are symptoms that require immediate investigation. I stood at attention and said nothing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. She turned to face me then, and her expression was not angry or disgusted. It was sad. I've known you for 6 years, Marcus. You're a good soldier and a good man. If something has happened to you, something beyond your control, I need to know. The Emperor's mercy can be swift and painless. There's no shame in falling to forces we don't understand. But I wanted to give you a chance to explain before I make my report. This was it. The moment where I could confess everything, accept my fate, and die with whatever honor remained to a corrupted soldier. The proper response was clear. I should drop to my knees and beg for the Emperor's forgiveness. I should accept the bolt round to the head and hope my soul could still find peace. That's what Sergeant Marcus Vrel would have done 3 months ago. But I wasn't Sergeant Marcus Vrel anymore. Not entirely. The thing I was becoming had different ideas about survival. I looked at Commissar Holt and made a choice that sealed my fate. I respectfully request a medical evaluation, I said. If there's something wrong with me, I want to know. Let the doctors examine me properly. If they find corruption, I'll accept their judgment. It was a delay tactic, nothing more. The medical facility was 3 kilometers away in another section of the compound. I would be escorted there by guards, examined by doctors who would immediately see what I had become, and then executed in a sterile room far from my squad. But it bought me time. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to run. Commissar Holt studied my face for a long moment. I wondered if she could see the changes in my eyes, the slight elongation of my pupils, the gold flecks that shouldn't exist in human irises. Finally, she nodded. Very well. Report to Medical Bay 7 at 0600 tomorrow. Bring your service record and be prepared for a full examination. Dismissed. I saluted and left her office, my mind racing. Tomorrow morning, I had less than 16 hours to decide what to do. Stay and face certain death, or run and become the monster I was already halfway to being. That night I didn't sleep at all. I sat on my bunk and listened to the voices in my head argue about what I should do. The voice of glory said I should fight my way out, that I was strong enough now to kill any soldier who tried to stop me. The voice of change said I should embrace what was happening and seek out others like me. The voice of pleasure said I should take what I wanted and stop caring about consequences. And the quiet voice said that running was just another form of acceptance, that the moment I fled would be the moment I admitted I was no longer human. As dawn approached and the barracks began to stir with soldiers preparing for another day of war, I made my decision. I would not report to Medical Base 7. I would not face the Commissar's mercy. I would run into the wilderness of Vorgus III and let the transformation complete itself. Whatever I became out there, alone in the ruins of a broken world, it would be something that chose its own path. The Emperor had abandoned me the moment that cultist's blade cut my arm. Now I would abandon the Emperor in return. I gathered my gear quietly while the others prepared for morning formation. Nobody noticed when I slipped out the side door and headed toward the perimeter fence. Nobody saw me climb over the razor wire with strength that made the obstacle meaningless. And by the time they realized Sergeant Marcus Vrel was missing, I was already kilometers away, running through ruins on legs that were learning to move in ways human legs never could. The wilderness of Vorgus III was a graveyard of civilization. Burned-out buildings stretched for kilometers in every direction, their metal frames twisted by artillery fire and their walls collapsed into piles of rubble that the wind slowly turned to dust. Between the ruins grew strange plants that had never existed before the war. Vegetation that fed on chemical spills and sprouted in colors that hurt to look at. Purple vines climbed through shattered windows, Orange moss covered exposed steel beams. The air tasted like metal and rot, and every shadow could hide death. I ran for 3 days straight without stopping. My transformed body didn't need rest the way it used to. My lungs pulled oxygen from the toxic air without complaint. My legs carried me over broken ground at speeds that would have left my old self gasping and collapsed. I ran until I was far enough from the Imperial compound that pursuit became unlikely, deep into territory that had been contested so many times that neither side really controlled it anymore. Only then did I stop to understand what I had become. The hunger hit me on the 4th day. Not hunger for food exactly, but a deeper need that came from somewhere in my changing core. My body wanted something that ration packs couldn't provide. I found myself drawn to areas where fighting had been recent, where bodies still lay in the streets waiting for collection details that might never come. The smell of decay should have disgusted me. Instead, it made my mouth water. I stood over the corpse of a cultist, maybe dead for 2 days, and felt an urge to consume that terrified me. I backed away and ran again, trying to escape the hunger that lived inside my own flesh. The physical changes accelerated without the need to hide them. My spine curved further, forcing me to hunch forward slightly as I moved. The bone spurs growing from my shoulder blades pushed through the skin, emerging as sharp points maybe 5 centimeters long that caught on my torn uniform. I ripped away the fabric and let the spurs grow freely. They extended another 3 centimeters in a single day, developing into proper protrusions that I could feel flexing when I moved my shoulders. My skin had hardened across my entire back now, forming armored plates that overlapped like scales. When I pressed on them, they didn't give it all. Last fire might scorch them or burn through at direct angles, but glancing shots would bounce off this natural armor. My hands were the most dramatic change. Both of them now had 6 fingers, the extra digits fully formed and as strong as the originals. My fingernails had thickened into something more like claws, sharp enough to gouge marks in metal when I scraped them across a rusted girder. The bones in my palms had lengthened, making my hands look stretched and wrong. But they were powerful. I could grip a steel bar and bend it with just pressure from my fingers. The strength was intoxicating and horrible in equal measure. My face changed too, though I couldn't see it well without a mirror. My jaw had pushed forward, giving me a muzzle-like profile that made eating difficult until I learned the new shape of my mouth. My teeth were definitely fangs now, pointed and sharp, designed for tearing rather than chewing. My eyes had completed their transformation to something reptilian, with vertical slits for pupils and irises that glowed faintly gold in darkness. When I caught my reflection in a pool of stagnant water, I saw a face that was barely human anymore. Something predatory looked back at me, something built for hunting. The voices in my head were constant now, no longer whispering but speaking at normal volume, sometimes shouting to be heard over each other. The voice of glory demanded I find enemies and test my new strength in combat. The voice of change insisted I should seek out more mutations, push the transformation further. The voice of pleasure wanted me to explore every new sensation my altered body could experience. And the quiet voice reminded me that all things end eventually, that I was dying to my old self and being born as something new. The voices made it hard to think clearly, hard to remember who I used to be. I found the other mutants on the 7th day of my exile. I had been following a drainage tunnel that led beneath what used to be a residential district when I smelled them. The scent was wrong in a way that normal wrongness couldn't explain. It was the smell of flesh that had forgotten how to be human, of bodies that had been reshaped by forces that didn't care about the original design. I followed the scent deeper into the tunnels until I emerged in a large underground space that might have been a transit station once. Now, it was a lair. There were maybe 20 of them living in that space. Some were recent transformations like me, still mostly human-shaped but with obvious changes. A woman with 3 arms. A man whose skin had turned completely gray and developed bony ridges along his skull. A young person whose legs had fused together into something that moved like a snake's tail. But others had gone much further. Things that had been human once but now looked more like animals or insects or combinations that nature had never intended. A creature with 4 legs and 2 torsos, both heads speaking different words at the same time. Something that crawled on the ceiling with too many joints in its limbs. A mass of flesh that pulsed and breathed but had no clear shape at all. They noticed me immediately. The ones who still had human eyes turned to stare. The ones who had lost their eyes sensed me in other ways, their heads tracking my movement with predator precision. I tensed, ready to fight or run, but no attack came. Instead, one of the more human-looking ones approached. He was tall, maybe 2 meters, with arms that hung down past his knees and hands that had merged into blade-like appendages. His face was still recognizable as human, despite the extra eyes that had opened across his forehead. When he spoke, his voice was rough but understandable. "You're new to this," he said. "I can smell the change still working on you. How long since your first mutation?" "About 3 months," I replied. My voice sounded strange coming from my reshaped throat, deeper and harsher than it used to be. He nodded as if this made sense. "Then you're at the decision point. You can fight it and end up like them." He gestured toward the mindless creatures that prowled the edges of the space. "Or you can guide it and keep yourself." I didn't understand what he meant. He seemed to read the confusion on my mutated face. "Chaos mutation isn't random," he explained. "It responds to what you are inside. Your fears, your desires, your rage, everything you've buried deep comes out through your flesh. Fight it and your body becomes a reflection of that struggle, twisted and mindless. Accept it and the changes become purposeful. You stay aware. You stay you, just different." He showed me his blade hands, flexing them so they caught the dim light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. "I was a factory worker, spent 20 years cutting metal on production lines. When the mutation started, I fought it. These hands became random spikes and edges that I couldn't control. But when I accepted it, when I understood that my body was making me into what I already was, they became tools. Now I'm a better cutter than I ever was with machines." Other mutants gathered around, those who could still speak adding their stories. A woman whose body had become partially transparent told me she had always felt invisible in her life, ignored and overlooked. Now she actually was invisible when she wanted to be, and that gave her power instead of weakness. A man whose arms had multiplied said he had spent his life juggling too many responsibilities. Never enough hands for all the work. Now he had 8 arms and could handle anything. Their transformations made horrible sense. I asked what I was becoming then. What did my changes mean? The tall mutant with blade hands studied me carefully. "You're a soldier," he said. "Your body is making you into a better weapon, stronger, tougher, more dangerous. But there's something else too. You ran from your unit. You chose survival over duty. That means you value your own life, your own freedom. Keep that in mind as the changes continue. Don't let them make you into something that just follows orders, even if the orders come from new gods instead of the Emperor." The concept was terrifying. I had spent 15 years following orders, being part of something larger than myself. The idea of choosing my own path, of being responsible for what I became, felt more frightening than any battle I had fought. But I was already too far changed to go back. The Imperial Guard would kill me on sight now. My only choice was forward into whatever I was becoming. The mutants offered to let me stay with them. They had food, mostly scavenged from the ruins, but also some things I didn't want to examine too closely. They had water from underground springs that tasted foul but didn't kill you. And they had safety in numbers, enough mutated bodies to fight off the occasional patrol or scavenging party that wandered too close to their territory. It was a community of the damned, monsters helping monsters survive in a world that wanted them dead. I stayed for 3 weeks. During that time, my transformation continued, but in new directions. Instead of random changes, my body started adapting with purpose. A second pair of arms began budding from my sides just below my original arms. They started as small lumps but grew quickly, developing shoulders and elbows and hands over the course of days. The process was painful, like my ribcage was splitting open, but I gritted my fangs and endured it. These arms would make me more effective in combat, able to hold more weapons or attack from multiple angles. They were useful changes, not just monstrous ones. My legs thickened with new muscle that bunched under my armored skin. My thighs became powerful enough to crack stone when I jumped. My calves developed springs that let me leap 3 meters straight up without effort. I was becoming built for war, every part of me optimized for violence and survival. And the strange thing was, it felt right. For the first time in my life, my body matched what I actually did. I wasn't a normal human pretending to be a soldier. I was a weapon that thought. The pain changed too. The constant ache that had accompanied the early mutations faded, replaced by something different. Not pleasure exactly, but a kind of rightness. When my new arms pushed through the skin of my sides, breaking flesh and tearing muscle, it hurt. But the hurt felt like accomplishment, like crossing a finish line after a hard race. My body was rewarding me for accepting the changes instead of fighting them. The pain and satisfaction mixed together until I couldn't separate them anymore. My mind changed as well. The voices in my head became less chaotic, more organized. I learned to listen to each one separately, to understand what they offered and choose which guidance to follow. The glory voice helped me understand combat tactics for my new body. The change voice showed me how to flex muscles I hadn't known I had, how to extend my claws or retract them, how to harden my armored skin or soften it for flexibility. The pleasure voice taught me to enjoy what I was becoming instead of mourning what I had lost. And the quiet voice reminded me that I was dying to Marcus Vrel and being born as something else, something that didn't have a name yet. But I never lost myself completely. That was the crucial difference between me and the mindless creatures that prowled the edges of our underground refuge. I still remembered my service in the Imperial Guard. I still knew my squad's names, their faces, the battles we had fought together. I could recall the taste of ration packs and the smell of lasgun discharge, and the sound of Commissar Holt's voice when she gave orders. Those memories didn't fade. They just mattered less than they used to. They were relics of who I had been, not guides for who I was becoming. The moment of truth came when Imperial forces raided our refuge. They came at dawn, a full platoon of soldiers with flamers and meltaguns, weapons designed to kill mutants efficiently. Someone had reported our location, maybe a survivor from one of the scavenging parties we had driven off. The soldiers sealed the tunnel entrances and pumped promethium into the underground space, turning it into an oven meant to burn us alive. The mindless mutants panicked, running in circles or trying to dig through walls with whatever claws or tentacles they possessed. But those of us who had kept our awareness acted with purpose. The tall mutant with blade hands cut through a sealed door, his edges slicing metal like paper. Others used their strength to break through rubble-blocked passages. And I found myself leading a group of 5 mutants through a drainage pipe too small for normal humans but perfect for bodies that could compress and squeeze. We emerged behind the Imperial lines, coming up through a grate in an alley 50 meters from where the soldiers were concentrated. My tactical training, 15 years of experience that my transformation hadn't erased, told me exactly what to do. I led my group in a flanking attack that hit the soldiers from their weak side. My forearms wielded pieces of scrap metal as weapons, striking with strength that caved in helmets and broke bones through armor. My armored skin deflected glancing shots and turned away fire at poor angles. Direct hits still burned through, searing pain across my ribs and shoulder. But the wounds that would have killed the old Marcus Vrel instantly now just slowed me down. My new legs let me move faster than the soldiers could track, leaping over their heads and landing behind their formation. It was over in minutes. The soldiers broke and ran, leaving their flamers and meltaguns behind. They were rear-echelon troops, supply unit guards pressed into purge duty, not hardened Cadian line infantry. We had hit them hard and fast in terrain that favored close combat, and their training hadn't prepared them for mutants that could think tactically. We didn't pursue. We had made our point. We were not mindless beasts waiting to be exterminated. We were something that could fight back, something that could win. As I stood among the abandoned equipment, breathing heavily through lungs that now had extra chambers for processing oxygen, I understood what I had become. Not a monster, not a soldier. Something between and beyond both. I had retained my mind while transforming my body. I was aware, purposeful, dangerous, and free. The old Marcus Vrel was completely gone now. What remained was something new, something that the Imperium would call abomination, but that felt more real, more true than I had ever been as a human. The mutation was complete. Now I just had to decide what to do with this new existence. The victory over the Imperial patrol should have felt satisfying. Instead, it left me hollow. I stood among the scattered equipment and the bodies of soldiers who might have served in regiments I knew, and felt nothing except a distant recognition that I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I had killed Imperial Guard. I had attacked the organization I had served for 15 years. In the eyes of the Imperium, I was no longer a fallen soldier who might deserve mercy. I was an enemy combatant, a traitor, a monster that needed to be destroyed. The other mutants celebrated our survival. They danced among the flames that still burned from the Prometheum attack, their twisted bodies moving in ways that looked almost joyful. The tall mutant with blade hands clapped me on the shoulder with the flat of his weapon appendage. "You fought well," he said. "You're learning to use what you've become." But I felt no joy. I had learned something during that fight, something that frightened me more than any physical transformation could. I was good at being a monster. The tactical knowledge from my years of service translated perfectly to my new form. I knew how to move, where to strike, when to press an advantage. My transformed body just made me better at the killing I had always done. The only difference was the target. We couldn't stay in the underground refuge anymore. The Imperial forces knew its location and would return with heavier weapons, maybe artillery or orbital bombardment. Our group split up, each mutant or small cluster heading in different directions into the ruined landscape. The tall mutant offered to travel with me, but I refused. I needed to be alone, to understand what I had become without the distraction of others. He nodded as if he understood and wished me luck. Then he disappeared into the rubble with a speed his long limbs made possible. I wandered the ruins for days, avoiding both Imperial and cultist forces. My transformed body made stealth difficult. I was nearly 3 meters tall now, with 4 fully developed arms and a hunched posture that came from my curved spine and the heavy bone spurs jutting from my shoulders. My armored skin had spread to cover most of my body, overlapping plates that clinked quietly when I moved. My face was completely inhuman, a bestial muzzle with fangs that prevented my mouth from closing properly. I looked like something from a nightmare, something that children would scream about if they saw me in their dreams. But the worst part wasn't how I looked, it was how I felt. My emotions had changed along with my body. Things that used to matter simply didn't anymore. I felt no loyalty to the Imperium that had abandoned me. I felt no guilt about the soldiers I had killed. I felt no hope for redemption or return to human society. All those feelings had been burned away by the transformation, replaced by simpler drives. Survival, strength, freedom. The voices in my head had quieted somewhat, becoming more like instincts than separate entities. They no longer argued, they guided. I found myself drawn back toward Imperial territory despite the danger. Some part of me, maybe the last remnant of Sergeant Marcus Vrel, wanted to see my old unit one more time. I wanted to know if they remembered me or if I had simply been erased from their records like a clerical error. I wanted to see the faces of men I had served with and gauge their reactions to what I had become. It was a stupid urge, the kind that gets people killed. But I followed it anyway because I no longer feared death the way humans did. The 83rd Cadian Regiment had moved to a new forward position in the industrial sector, setting up defensive positions among the skeletal remains of manufactorums and processing plants. I watched them from a collapsed building 200 meters away, using my enhanced eyes to pick out individual soldiers. Their auspex sweeps were focused on the main approach roads and the sky, watching for cultist vehicles or aerial threats. The ruins behind their position were considered cleared territory, which gave me the opening I needed to observe without detection. I recognized most of them. Corporal Chen directing the placement of sandbag barriers, Private Hendricks moving with his slight limp as he carried ammunition boxes. Even Commissar Holt, her iron-gray hair visible as she inspected the perimeter defenses. They looked so small and fragile. I had been one of them just 4 months ago, but now they seemed like children playing at war. Their bodies were weak, breakable things that needed constant maintenance. They got tired after a few hours of work. They needed food 3 times a day and water even more often. They wore armor because their skin couldn't stop bullets. They carried weapons because their hands weren't deadly on their own. Everything about them screamed vulnerability, and I couldn't understand how I had ever been satisfied existing in such a limited form. But I also remembered what it felt like to be part of something larger than myself. To have brothers in arms who would die for you and you for them. To believe in a cause, even if that cause was just surviving one more day. Those memories felt distant now, like they belonged to someone else. The thing I had become didn't need brothers or causes. It was sufficient unto itself, a creature built for individual survival rather than collective purpose. I was about to leave when I saw my squad. They were manning a checkpoint on the perimeter, checking supply vehicles before allowing them into the compound. All 8 of them were there, the soldiers I had led on 100 patrols whose lives I had been responsible for. They looked tired and worn, older than they should after just 4 months. War did that to people, aged them faster than time alone could manage. I wondered if they ever thought about their missing sergeant, or if I had already faded from memory like so many other casualties. Chen was talking to Hendricks about something, his hands gesturing in the way he did when explaining technical details. Hendricks laughed at something, the sound carrying across the distance even though I shouldn't have been able to hear it with human ears. But my ears weren't human anymore. They had changed shape, becoming larger and more mobile, able to track sounds with predator precision. I could hear their conversation as clearly as if I stood next to them. They were talking about the new sergeant, comparing her to me, debating whether her cautious approach was better or worse than my aggressive tactics. So I had been replaced. Of course I had. The Imperial Guard didn't stop for one missing soldier, even a sergeant with 15 years of service. Someone else had taken my place, stepped into my role, and the machine kept running without pause. The realization should have hurt, but I felt only a distant amusement. I had spent 15 years being interchangeable parts in a vast military apparatus, and now I was finally free of that grinding mechanism. Movement caught my attention. A patrol was approaching my position, 4 soldiers sweeping through the ruins looking for threats. They were being thorough, checking every hiding spot, every collapsed room. They would find me in minutes if I stayed where I was. I could kill them easily. My 4 arms could tear through their armor, my claws could shred their flesh. My strength could break their bones with casual effort. It would be over before they could call for help. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the last echo of Sergeant Marcus Vrel, the part of me that still remembered oath and duty. Maybe it was simple pragmatism, knowing that killing Imperial soldiers would bring more forces down on my location. Or maybe it was something else, a recognition that these soldiers were doing their jobs just as I had once done mine. They weren't my enemy any more than I was theirs. We were all just pieces in a game played by powers too vast for individual lives to matter. I retreated before they could spot me, moving through the ruins with silence that seemed impossible for something my size. My transformed body was surprisingly graceful when it needed to be, able to flow through tight spaces and climb over obstacles without sound. I had become an apex predator, something built for hunting but also for hiding. Within minutes, I had put half a kilometer between myself and the patrol, moving deeper into contested territory where neither Imperial nor cultist forces maintained permanent positions. The encounter left me thinking about what I had lost and what I had gained. As a human, I had been weak, but connected. Part of something larger, even if that something used me as disposable resource. As a mutant, I was powerful but isolated, capable of surviving alone but unable to integrate into any normal society. I was stronger than I had ever been, but that strength came at the cost of everything else that made life worth living. Or did it? The voices in my head, quieter now but still present, whispered different perspectives. The glory voice insisted that strength was its own reward, that I should rejoice in my power and seek opportunities to test it. The change voice said that I was still evolving, that new forms of connection and purpose would emerge as I continued transforming. The pleasure voice suggested I should stop overthinking and simply enjoy the sensations of my new existence. And the quiet voice reminded me that all things end, that both my human life and my mutant existence were temporary states in an eternal cycle. I found a defensible position in the remains of a water treatment plant and settled into rest. My body didn't need sleep the way it used to, but it still required periods of reduced activity to process the ongoing changes. I could feel new developments happening inside me, organs shifting and adapting, bones reinforcing themselves, muscles growing denser. The transformation wasn't finished. It might never be finished. Chaos mutation was an ongoing process, a constant becoming rather than a final state. As twilight fell and the sky turned the color of infected wounds, I heard movement in the ruins nearby. Not Imperial soldiers this time. The footsteps were too irregular, the breathing too labored. I tensed, my forearms flexing and my claws extending. Whatever approached, I was ready to fight or flee depending on the threat level. But when the figure emerged from the shadows, I recognized the hunched shape and blade-like hands. It was the tall mutant from the underground refuge. He looked worse than when I had last seen him. New mutations had sprouted across his body, clusters of eyes on his chest and arms, tentacles growing from his back like grotesque wings. But his face still held intelligence. And when he spoke, his voice was steady. "I tracked you," he said. "Wasn't hard. You're not exactly subtle at your size." He sat down on a chunk of concrete, his blade hands resting on what passed for his knees. "I wanted to warn you. There's a warband moving into this sector, chaos forces, proper ones with leaders and organization. They're recruiting mutants like us, offering purpose and protection in exchange for service." I asked what kind of service. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The same thing you did in the Imperial Guard. Fighting, killing, following orders, just for different masters with different goals. Some of the mutants from our group have already joined. They like the structure, the sense of belonging to something again. But I've seen where that leads. You trade one form of servitude for another, and eventually you lose what made you individual in the first place." The prospect of joining a chaos warband felt both tempting and repulsive. Part of me missed having orders to follow, missions to complete, a clear role to fill. But I had fled the Imperial Guard specifically to escape that kind of existence. Becoming a soldier again, even for chaos instead of the Imperium, seemed like trading one cage for another. I told him I wasn't interested. He nodded as if he had expected this answer. Then you need to leave this world, he said. The war is intensifying. Both sides are going to start using more extreme measures. Virus bombs if the contamination gets worse, orbital strikes, maybe worse things. Mutants caught between Imperial and Chaos forces won't survive. You need to find a way off-world before this place becomes a grave. The idea of leaving Vorgus III hadn't occurred to me. I had been so focused on day-to-day survival that I hadn't thought about long-term future. But he was right. This world was dying, burned and broken by war that would only escalate. Staying here meant eventually being caught in some weapon of mass destruction that even my transformed body couldn't survive. I asked how a 3-meter-tall mutant was supposed to board a transport ship. He smiled with a mouth that had too many teeth. The same way anything dangerous and useful gets transported. You make yourself valuable to someone with access to ships. Chaos warbands aren't the only option. There are rogue traders, smugglers, mercenary companies. Someone will take you if you offer the right services. We talked through the night, sharing information about the sector's geography and politics. He had been gathering intelligence during his travels, learning which factions operated in which territories, where ships made landfall, which powers might be willing to deal with mutants. His knowledge surprised me until I remembered he had been a factory worker before his transformation, someone used to logistics and supply chains. Those skills hadn't disappeared with his humanity. They had adapted to his new existence. By dawn, I had made my decision. I would head toward the spaceport on the continent's eastern edge, a facility that saw traffic from less reputable traders willing to operate in war zones. The journey would take weeks through dangerous territory, but I had few better options. The tall mutant offered to accompany me part of the way, and I accepted. Having someone to watch my back, even another monster, made practical sense. We traveled together for 5 days before our paths diverged. He was heading north toward rumors of a mutant community that had established itself in the frozen wastes, while I continued east toward the spaceport. Our parting was brief, just a nod of acknowledgement between creatures that had once been human and now were something else. I never learned his name, never knew who he had been before the mutations. It didn't matter. We were defined by what we had become, not what we had been. The rest of the journey was lonely but uneventful. I avoided contact with all forces, Imperial and Chaos alike. I scavenged food from the ruins, though my transformed body needed less sustenance than my human form had required. I rested in hidden places and moved primarily at night, when my altered eyes gave me an advantage. And I thought about the future, about what kind of existence awaited something like me in a galaxy that had no place for creatures that were neither fully human nor fully lost to chaos. I reached the spaceport 3 weeks after leaving the tall mutant. The facility was a chaotic mess of ships coming and going, traders of every description doing business in open defiance of Imperial regulations. I watched from a distance, studying the patterns, looking for an opportunity. Eventually, I would find a ship that would take me. Eventually, I would leave this world and its wars behind. But I would carry the transformation with me forever. The body changes in hours, I thought, remembering the first cough, the first wound, the first sign that something was wrong. The mind takes longer to break. Sometimes it never does. I was living proof of that truth. I still remembered being Sergeant Marcus Vrell. I still carried his memories, his tactical knowledge, his understanding of duty and honor. But those things belonged to a dead man. What remained was something new, something the Imperium called abomination. But that felt more real and more alive than any human existence could offer. I was a monster with a man's memories, powerful and free and utterly alone. That wasn't mercy. It was a different kind of damnation, one I would carry across the stars to whatever future awaited creatures like me in the grim darkness of the far future.